So let's start our eighth session on Buddhism 101. So let's put our hands together and say sadhu 3 times. So we are going to discuss a very interesting topic today. It's also known as the core of Buddhism, sort of to encapsulate everything that we speak in Buddhism, called the Four Noble Truths. So we are on the 1st of June today, and it's the eighth session. Jason is the one who's keeping the track of the sessions, and the month of May is over. By the way, do you know why May is called May? It's because it may rain, it may be sunny, it may be, you know. So we have June now. So we are going to finish this within the month of June, hopefully. We only have 4 more sessions. And so let's start with the Four Noble Truths today. The idea of Four Noble Truths is actually, it's a main discourse in Buddhism. But then the Four Noble Truths is not just one thing. It's an approach where we can use to identify a problem. So, for example, let's say that before we go there, I also need to tell something. From today, we are going to be a little theoretical, not really theoretical. You will learn a lot of Buddhist Pali words like anicca, dukkha, and different Pali words. And when I was talking in the previous 4 sessions, that was more a relaxed language. That was normal English without bringing in Pali words. What I understood is that my understanding of Buddhism came before I read Buddhism. So when I became a monk because it resonated with what I have seen. So again, you don't necessarily have to understand or by heart recite all these words, because at least I can speak for myself. My understanding of whatever it is came before I read Buddhism. So it's not necessarily connected. But then there's also this thing, we need to attach some labels to what we see in our mind. Like we see flowers, it would be nice to call it, well, that this is a rose, or this an anthurium flower or an orchid. So when we have a name, we can communicate it with the others. So that's one important point of having a lot of jargon in terminology. But then essentially, we should not be overwhelmed with these words. It's only to label something, to discuss something. The true understanding is not in the words. And when I again started getting exposed to Buddhism, I particularly felt that I resonate more with the Theravada form of Buddhism. So it was very convenient that where I was born in Sri Lanka, it was Theravada Buddhism. So that's why we named under the Theravada faction. But then there's this other idea in Buddhism called, there are 3 types of ways you could pursue Buddhism: Satya Jnana, Krutya Jnana, and Kruta Jnana, which means that you need to hear it. You need to sort of get exposed to it. It's something that you already know, but you get reminded, you get exposed to it, and then you start practically doing it. So Satya is the first part where you learn about it or you hear about it, and then the second part, or at least understand, have a conceptual understanding. And the second part is more about how do you do it, how you put it into practice through different tools like mindfulness, and then what happens after. So again, from today onwards, I'm going to bring in a little bit of more scriptural references. Scriptural references mainly coming from the Pali canon. And you will also notice that it's like a jigsaw puzzle. From whatever we've been discussing from the first day to the final session, it's a puzzle which would fit nicely at the end. So that's what we are going to do. And then if we are to look at the Four Noble Truth model, let me call it the model. The Four Noble Truth is like we have a problem to solve, and then we are taking a four-pronged approach. So that's basically Four Noble Truths. And the best way to explain this is through this beautiful sutta called the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta. Now, the other thing we would notice in both Pali and Sanskrit languages, the words are pretty long. It is not one word, it's a mix of so many different words. So I just put a dash in the middle, but it would go as Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, just one word. So you need to then sort of decode and decipher. So in Sanskrit, in Pali, you need to understand the grammar of Sanskrit and Pali in order to decode this. So that's a little bit of extra work. But then again, I also understand because of this same language barrier when trying to translate the same nuanced idea to English, a lot get lost in translation. So Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, we are aware of the word Dhamma now, right? We have heard of Dhamma. Dhamma being the nature of the world, and by that we mean the nature of our conscious experience. Dhamma. Chakra means a wheel. So the very famous Buddhist symbol, which is right next to this, the wheel of Dhamma, is coming from this sutta. So this the English way of putting this would be setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. So Pavattana means the the setting in motion, or the existential setting, existential flow of the Dhamma. So Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which also I put this little thing called SN in brackets, that means Samyukta Nikaya, or the linked discourses. So if you're again wondering what it is, so we discussed about uh, five baskets of books there is in the Sutta Pitaka, so Samyukta Nikaya. And then this story is quite interesting. It sort of encapsulates what Buddha was journeying through from his beginning, where he was a rich prince born to a local kingdom, and then he was having a lot of fun. So he was exploring many hedonistic ways. In fact, he had quite the luxurious life and a lot of things that he enjoyed. And then one day he thought, well, I'm going to take a different path. I feel that there's a problem, there's something that I need to fix, and I'm going to take a different path. And then he went to asceticism. So, asceticism, it means that you strip down to your basic needs, be fulfilled with some of your minimalistic needs, and then become a monk. So, not a clergyman, a monk. So there's a slight difference between a clergyman or in Pali it would be called as pujaka or brahman. A brahman is usually a rich temple monastery owner. So they have a lot of land. They have had a lot of land, like the medieval times church. They had a lot of land. But an ascetic does not have anything. Ascetic is just empty. He's also called a mendicant. Even in Christianity, there's a separate group called the mendicants, Benedictine stream. So these mendicants would go on their truth seeking. So Buddha or Prince Siddhartha joined as a mendicant. He had to cut his hair, long hair, and then remove his jewelry and stuff, and then resorted to a very minimalistic path, and he did that. Now during this journey, he met five friends. And I put this picture because it's a beautiful depiction. Nowadays, when you talk about monks, we think all the monks are the same, like shaved head and all that. But there was no Buddhism at the time. They were very free thinkers, philosophers, ascetics who were into great meditational practices, very hardcore. They have dedicated their entire lives. So those type of mendicants or ascetics. So now they were part of Buddha's. They were all good friends, six of them. So they went to different teachers, they tried different paths, and then finally they came to this. So it took about 6 years, about a few years that they completed this journey. But then at the end, they came to this understanding, okay, if we are to understand the true enlightenment, true liberation or emancipation, we need to resort into a very severe or a very extreme form of asceticism. We would not eat for days. We would be meditating for hours, only sleeping for 2 hours, but meditating for 22 hours. And then we would not eat, we would not drink anything, any water. That's a very extreme form of asceticism. So then Buddha was doing that. And then one day he finished, well, this is not liberation. He told his friends, but the friends said, well, you seems to be a little lazy, that's why we are leaving. We are still going to do that. So Buddha left, Prince Siddhartha left. And then one day, Prince Siddhartha figured out, well, there's another way. So then he got enlightened. So this is the classical story of how he became Buddha. But then he spent some time by himself contemplating, and then he returned to these five friends they thought, well, he left us. He must have gotten it wrong now, and he's coming here. Anyway, he's our good old friend, and he's a very reputed prince, and then he's a very learned and a honest person. So we are going to say hello, but we are not going to listen to what he's going to say. So then Buddha said, well, friends, I have understood my mind. I have become Buddha. But they said, well, we don't believe. They did not accept Buddha in the beginning. So then Buddha had a discussion with these five ascetics over 7 days. Well, everything in Buddhism is 7 days and seven people. So it's just, I think, a way of putting it in literature form. But then I'm sure that this discussion was very long, more than a day. So this discussion is now called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, or the summary of that discussion. So that is the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So in this sutta, he explains what he went through and the path he's taking in a very nutshell manner. So it's a very important sutta. You could say one of the most important suttas in Buddhism as well. So I'm going to take a further explanation into this sutta using another sutta called Satcha Vibhanga Sutta. Vibhanga means further analysis or deeper analysis. So Satcha means the truth, analysis of the deeper truth. So it appears in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses. So that's why it's named. So we are going to use these two wonderful suttas and then discuss about Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. But when we are going to discuss why we need this further analysis, I remember one day there was a story. Nasruddin, he could say he's a very famous philosopher. I don't know if he's a true character or a made-up character, but there are very interesting stories of Nasruddin and Aesop and so many people who are stand-up comedians. They're jokers, but their thoughts are very profound. So one day, Nasruddin at night, his house is further away, but he came under a street light, and then he was searching for something. So his friends came and asked, "What are you looking for?" Then he said, "I'm looking for my key." Then they asked, "Did you lose the key here?" He said, "No, it's just there's more light under here. That's why I'm looking. The key somewhere else, right?" I thought of that because in this Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and Satcha Vibhanga, there's this beautiful word called Aloko Udapadi. Aloko means light. So now when we are looking for something, we need to look at the right place, the correct place. So then we need to do a proper deep root cause analysis. So here Buddhism becomes very very philosophical and scientific in a way. So one of the reasons that I resonated with it because you don't have to believe in Buddhism. There's no believing in Buddhism. You do the analysis, you understand, you do your practice, and then you realize. That's the path in Buddhism usually. So Alokudapadi, we are not doing the Nasruddin type of search. We are going to do a deeper, in-depth study, which will now require a little bit of Pali words. So let's go to the next slide. Now this is not the whole Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It's an extract of that. I will just recite. Dveme bhikkhave anta pappajitena sevitabba katame dve. Now, you might not get it because it's in a different language, but then there's a lot of similarities. I always find there's a lot of similarities in all languages. The word for two in Spanish is dos, right? And even in English, you find duo. So here in Sanskrit or in Pali, it's dve. You find dve in the beginning, dve. Dveme bhikkhave. And bhikkhu or bhikkha, what does that mean to you? Bhikkhu. Bhikkhu means a monk. So, dveme bhikkhave anta pabbajitena sevitabba means Buddha is talking about monks. There are two extremes that one should avoid, or an ascetic should avoid. Kama sukhallikānu yogo. Hino gamo potujjaniko anariyo anatta sanghito yo chayam atta kilometani yogo. Now, this is a beautiful sutta, and a lot of people like chanting this sutta. Now, people chant this sutta, but this is actually a discussion Buddha had with the five ascetics, five good friends. When people chant this sutta, they are probably chanting it to get out of their grief, or they sometimes wish, may the prosperity come to me. May I get a new house, may I get a new car, may I get a new girlfriend, they chant with these type of notions. But the true value of this sutta is really understanding these words, not just mere chanting of that. Of course, you can use chanting for different purposes. During retreats, we use chanting meditation, but it is not to chant that, it's to realize the mind with a deeper realization. So, the same way we can look at this sutta, that's something we really have to decode and understand, but then there's a lot of Pali words, so I'm going to make it easy for you. I will show how we can make it easy. So the next part essentially tells us idam ko panabhikkave dukkham arya satcham. Dukkham. We heard the word dukkham before, right? Remember? Dukkha, sukha, dukkha, adukkhama sukha. Remember? Dukkha was the negative part. Sukha, sukhi attana pariharani. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhi tatta. So sukha is the more positive part. Dukkha is the more negative part or the suffering. Let's call it suffering. So it's called here as suffering. Arya Satcham. Satcham means the truth. So there's a truth of, noble truth of suffering. But then let's also discuss if dukkha necessarily means suffering, or does it mean something even more profound. So then we have this here, but then let's not get into detail and try to do a word by word translation. And then we have the next phrase, which talks about samudaya arya satcham, origin of suffering, nirodha arya satcham. Idam ko parabhikkave dukkha nirodha arya satcham. Idam ko parabhikkave dukkha samudaya arya satcham. Dukkha samudaya and dukkha nirodha. The origin of the suffering, or the root cause of suffering, and the cessation of suffering. So we have two more words. And then we have the final word, idam ko panabhikkave dukkha nirodha gamini patipada arya satcham. So it all appears in one word, like I told you. Nirodha gamini patipada arya satcham. The noble eightfold path, or the path, basically. So then right view, right intention, etc., etc. The eightfold noble path. So this is the summary of the entire Buddhist discourse. But then it's in order to understand that, let's dwell into that further. But then the summary of this particular sutta is this. Is that we have dukkha, or the suffering, samudaya and nirodha, the origin and the cessation, and then the marga, the path to get out of that. So this four noble truth is actually a model which we can use into many situations. We are trying to first understand, define the problem. It's a very scientific way of looking at this. Dukkha means what's the problem that we are trying to understand. So a big part of this whole approach is trying to understand the problem. They say understanding the problem is 50% of the solution. So a big part of that is trying to understand the problem, dukkha, and then the root cause of that, samudaya. What makes that, or how does that come to be, the root cause of that, and the cessation, and then to practically do it, what are the steps, what is the path. Now, if we are to apply the same approach to a day-to-day situation, I see in Roswell Road the traffic is getting more and more. Why is there traffic? The road is small. There's a new neighborhood, there's more vehicles, so the road is small. So there's a bottleneck. So that's a cause of traffic. What should we do to get out of that traffic? Widen the road. So then that's the solution. In order to widen the road, what are the steps? We need to do a survey, we need to do or everything what engineers do. They plan, they construct, and end of the orange corn season, or also called summer, right? So that's an approach. But then is traffic truly because the road is narrow? Is that the real root cause of traffic? The other day I asked Jason, why do we have so many traffic accidents? It's because there are vehicles. So if we go further, why do we have to travel a road? Why can't we travel by air, on air? Because we know birds can fly in many directions, not only on a particular set road. So why don't we take that approach? Or one would say, why do you travel at all? Why can't we all work from home? Right? So we don't have to travel. We don't have to go to get groceries. Everything comes from our home. Then one could ask, why do you have to work? So you keep drilling down, you keep digging down. So that's the way of Vibhanga. So Vibhanga is that further analysis going to the very root cause. So that's what we do here. So with the Vibhanga, I'm going to use this Satya Vibhanga Sutta now to explain what we just. So Satya Vibhanga Sutta starts with Katamacha also Dukkam Mariya Satya. Dear monk, what is dukkha? What is dukkha? So he's trying to now give a very detailed explanation to that. But before I go there, I have another photo down here of the two monks, two disciples of Buddha. They are the closest and the most knowledgeable disciples, so the most talented disciples who appears in Buddhism. They are called Sariputta and Moggallana. A very interesting story. One is Sariputta and Moggallana. They are not ascetics, but they are philosophers. They study under a great teacher called Sanju Bellatiputta. So they study under him, and they go to a place which is a strip club essentially in modern day, because they were very two rich kids. They had a lot of they came from affluent families. So they went to this cabaret show, and they were looking at the show, but they could not feel happiness. They found something. We are looking for a deeper truth. Well, this is all nice. We have seen that, but what is beyond that? So when they were returning from that cabaret show, they met a little monk. So then that they were very inquisitive. They asked, "Monk, little monk, what are you? What is your philosophy?" He said, "Well, I met this wonderful teacher, Gautama Buddha, and then following his philosophy." So then they asked, so the whole chat went into a longer discussion, and then they completely switched to, they came to Buddha, and then they started having a longer chat with Buddha, and they became enlightened, and they became the two greatest disciples of Buddha, Sariputta and Moggallana. So the monk Sariputta is particularly known to be a very intellectual monk, an academic monk, and Moggallana is known to be a monk who's extremely good at meditation, different states of mind meditation. So the Moggallana is depicted in blue color. Maybe he was a dark person. He's depicted in blue, and Sariputta in bright yellow color. And there's Buddha in the middle. So this is the Satya Vibhanga Sutta is actually a discussion done with the monk Sariputta and Buddha, and then Sariputta and the rest of the other students. So this is the Satya Vibhanga Sutta. So in this he goes in to ask, what is dukkha? What is dukkha pariyasaccha? Jatipi dukkha, jarapi dukkha, marnapi dukkha. So there's a whole list. But don't worry about these words. I will get to this list. But then there's also a very interesting word which appears called pancha upadana. I will also get into that. Don't worry about any of these words. So then the first is, you ask, what is dukkha? So then he gives an answer. Well, jati is a dukkha. You see on the left, jati is a dukkha. But then the next word is, okay, so then tell us what is jati. Patamacha also jati. So then he keeps on trying to explain what is jati, what is jara, and everything which was mentioned above here. There's an explanation to that. So that's why it's very detailed and very nice approach. It's very well defined, very well discoursed. So I'll take just one or two examples here without going into all the word by word translations again. So what is jati? It's the birth of beginnings of various classes or various beings. The production, their conception, coming into existence, the appearance of aggregates. Now, what does aggregate mean? That's a question that we are going to take later. Acquiring the sense basis. This is called birth. Now, this is a wonderful definition even we can use to date. Using this, we can ask a question. Is artificial intelligence all birth? Can that be birth? This definition has a wonderful answer to cover that. There's a test called Turing test. Have you heard of Turing test? I think Alex Turing, who was one of the early scientists on computers, he came up with a test where a machine will be equal to the human intelligence, and that test is called the Turing test. So even today, if you have to measure a robot or AI, if they are really conscious or not, you use the Turing test, right? So if you take this definition of jati, if someone has acquired sense bases, if someone is conscious, that is when he is called being born. Not necessarily if you're a animal or a being who's born to a mother or without a mother, because there's cell division. So it's all covered in this. So that's why it's a very fantastic definition. So even an AI, if he's conscious, can be categorized as a birth. So just something I want to share. But then what is aging, etc., etc. So everything that we discuss up here is very detailed definition. The detailed definition is given. But then we have this word appearing called the Pancha Upadana Kanda or five aggregates, which is a separate topic. That's why I said this is going to be like a jigsaw puzzle. We are going to sort of see how this all fits at the end. So that is jatis, but again, don't get overwhelmed by these words. I'm going to put this in a nice table and then explain it to you. So jati is the birth. Birth is a suffering. You agree that birth is suffering? Why do people have birthday celebrations then? If birth is a suffering, why do people have birthday celebrations? So birth is the source of your happiness also, if you look at it. If you were never born, you would not be able to be happy. But then you were sad because you were born. If you had no sense basis, if you had no conscious receiving of experience, if you did not have that sense of ego, there will be no suffering also. So it might make theoretical sense, but then again, this is not a nihilistic way of looking at the world. Buddha is just the messenger, so don't shoot the messenger, right? What if you have ever felt any pain in your life, that's because you were born, right? Had you not been born, you would have not felt it. So that is not to say being born is a wrong thing or it's a bad thing. It's just the way it is. So we need to, without taking it from that nihilistic standpoint, we need to look at it from the more practical or the natural standpoint. That is the Dharma. People are born, and when they are born, you are exposed to suffering. One part could be good, one part could be bad. So that is suffering. And so once you're born, the entire process of being born could be a little suffocating because you have to come out of that birth canal and then you're crying, you get exposed to a whole new world. So in that sense, the birth is suffering. And then aging is suffering. Is that true? Aging is suffering. We can't ask this from the young people. They would not feel the aging, right? But then there's at one point you start feeling the aging, like from your 20s to 30s, you feel that you are getting old. 30s to 40s, you feel that you are getting old. 40s to 50s, and then I see people of all ages, right? More age you get, there are certain difficulties. You lose your hearing, you lose your eyesight, you can't read, you need glasses, you need walkers, and so aging, there's a suffering. Death is suffering. True. But for most people, that's the most feared activity, death. They're very afraid of that. If not the death, the actual activity of death, the notion that you might die, that's a suffering, right? So death is suffering. And then there are two words, soka parideva. So there's grief due to all sorts of things, but then parideva means a deeper way, a deeper grief, a lamentation, like a more deeper grief. And then there's dukkha again. So we are trying to talk about dukkha, but then you find the word dukkha again there. So here dukkha means all the bodily pain, whatever the bodily pains, the ailments, the disease, including being thirsty. That's also body pain, sweat, mosquitoes, ticks, everything, bodily pains, dukkha. And then domanassa means all the mental pains. You can be anxious, you can be depressed, you can be there are so many thoughts in our mind, so many emotions, which can be, some can be very positive, some can be very negative. Everything that we discussed earlier, fear, anger, domanassa. So then there's domanassa. And then there's upayasa, which means that the despair you get due to the outside changes, due to catastrophe. There's a hurricane, I lost my house, I'm in a state of wisdom. And then there are two other words, Piyahi Vippa and Apiyahi Sampa. Let's say that you have something that you like. Now, Piyahi Vippa does not necessarily mean a person. We can apply the whole four P's here. A person, a place, something that you own, or even a pastime that you do. If you are if we are to separate from what you love, that's a suffering. You love a person and that person is now dead, you are lamenting, you're grieving. I love a particular place, I like that place so much. Now that place is completely um, taken by another developer, and there's a new condominium, right, colleague? Remember our place, the shelter? There was this beautiful home for homeless people, and they're now going to demolish it and make an apartment complex there. So a place is separated. We can be upset about it. We can be sad about it. Also, the other part, appiya hisampan. There's a place that I don't want to go, but then I'm put there. I have to be there. And there's a person that I don't want to interact. I have to sit with that person most of the time. So appiya hisampayoga. And then there's another word, yampi ichan nalabati tampi dukkha, which means I wish for something, I don't get it, I'm heartbroken. The wish is not coming true. So it's a beautiful summary of the dukkha, what could happen to a person. And then there's the last part, Panch Upadana Kanda Dukkha, which I'm not going to discuss because we need to have more context. What are five aggregates? Five aggregates subject of grasping are suffering. So let's keep it at the bottom. But is this all? Are they all? Does this cover all the dukkha in the world? The suffering in the world? No, this is not all. This is only what you're going to get at Buddhism 101. Right? If you want further dukkha, it will be the next more advanced course. But then, what I want to say is that people sometimes take, when you see something in scripture, well, this is it. That's all the dukkha. No, this is just what was discussed at that point. That because you find different suttas which would have more of explanation, more varieties, more variations, or more ways of looking at it. So there's no end to it. You can keep drilling it down, dissecting into smaller pieces. So there could be so many, but this is a summary that we are going to use as a baseline. It's a good baseline. It's a good place to start. Now the question is Buddhism all about suffering? So a lot of people say Buddhism, it's all about suffering. In fact, one reason I never looked into Buddhism when I was young, because I've always heard Buddhism is about dukkha, dukkha, dukkha. And I could not get that, I could not understand it. Why people have to be in dukkha. The point of life is to celebrate, to enjoy, be happy. And why are you always talking about dukkha? But then later on I realized some people think that the word dukkha is literally suffering. But then let's see if it's all about suffering or if there's something more to it. So if we take the word dukkha, we can divide the word dukkha into two parts, Vedaita and Avedaita. So the Vedaita means something that you can feel, that you can sense. Avedaita means that you cannot feel. Now what does that mean? Is there a dukkha where you don't feel? What does that mean? Let's take an example. If we take a glass of water, leave it on the table, if we drink half of that, we see the water is reducing. What is now? It was full and then it's half now. But if we leave the rest of that glass here, we go away for a few years, come back, the glass is probably empty because it got evaporated. Now, we left 2 years ago, we came after 2 years, the glass is empty, and we assume that it's probably due to evaporation. But did we feel evaporation? Did we see evaporation? We intellectually, we rationally assume that there's evaporation. So the same way, some of these dukkhas are not to be felt. They are not felt sensations. They can be understood in a intellectual way. Now, when I say intellectual, I'm also going to make a distinction between intellectual and conceptual. Intellectual or intelligence in Buddhism or jnana in Buddhism is not conceptual understanding. Okay, so there's a small difference. So there's a component of this suffering which is not necessarily a connotation of suffering. So again, I don't have another word for dukkha. I've been talking with one of the monks here in North America who has translated a lot of Pali Canon to English. We're having this discussion about if we can really coin a different word for dukkha other than suffering. Suffering is a good word, but it's very limiting. It's only part of the truth. Dukkha has a more deeper or more nuanced idea than just suffering. So then, Vedaita, Avedaita, we can also divide this dukkha into three parts: physical, mental, and philosophical. So, if you look at the jara dukkha, the age is suffering. Now, there's a physical component to it. You feel tired, you feel difficult to walk, you need a cane to walk. Now, that's a physical part. But then there's also mental part. Well, I was so beautiful when I was young. Now I'm wrinkled, so I'm aging, and this is a mental suffering. Wrinkle has no physical effect. It does not have a physical pain. If you have arthritis, it might have physical pain, but wrinkling has no physical pain. But there's a mental pain, right? I have silver hair, I have gray hair. It's a mental pain. Just because of your hair color changes, there's no physical pain to you. So then we can divide this to physical pain and mental pain. And then there's a whole philosophical. We can't call it a pain because it's not a pain, because it's philosophical. So this last part again, Pancha Upadana Dukkha, or the five aggregates, that is something like that. It's a philosophical or an intellectual explanation to this, which is also under the category of dukkha, which is not a felt thing. It's not a physical or a mental felt thing. There's another way of looking at dukkha, which is called dukkha dukkha, viparinama dukkha, and sankhara dukkha. So dukkha dukkha. Now there's a lot of jargon. Don't worry, just bear with me for a couple of more minutes. Dukkha dukkha means everything that we discussed, which are in the negative side, which are originating from negativity. So the fear, disgust, anger, hatred, pain, disease, ailment, aging, death, separation, they are all sort of part of that. And then we discussed in the beginning that there's a cost of happiness. There's the happiness requires effort, and that effort requires you to work. And then there's depending on external activities, external stimulations. Even if you do that, there's limitations to your 100% happiness. And then we discussed that even somehow you get this, you get everything under your basket, you can still 100% fulfill yourself. You feel it, but it gets evaporated the following day when you wake up. And then there's this continuous nature of fading away. Remember, like the bell curve, it starts, but then it fades a bit. So now this part is mentioned under the viparinama dukkha. So the negativity is anyway suffering, but even when it's positivity, there could still be suffering because we can't hold that positivity. Or we'll be very anxious. Is this positivity going to last? Or is it going to go away soon? So this is the viparinama dukkha. Sankhara dukkha, again, I'm not going to talk today. It requires a different explanation. But then for the simplicity, we can put something like all this mental effort, the mental activity. The right word is conditional, the unsatisfactoriness inherent in all conditioned phenomena is called sankhara. So let's discuss that later. But then all this existential stress can be put under sankhara dukkha. So now here with this slide, what I wanted to tell you is that dukkha is not just suffering. It's a word which goes beyond that, and there are different layers to dukkha. Dukkha, it's purely suffering due to pain. But viparinama dukkha is not due to that bad negative pain. It's a different idea. And then there's felt dukkha and non-felt dukkha, vedaita and avedaita. So that's dukkha. And then let's go to samudaya and nirodha. That's relatively easy. Origin of suffering is craving. So that's a very tanhaya jayati soko, tanhaya jayati bhayam. Tanhaya vippamuttassa natti soko kuto bhayam. Which means it's not in this particular sutta, it's coming from something else called Dhammapada. Origin of suffering is craving. Correct? You love someone. Let's say that I ask sometimes when people have a fight and they come to me sometimes, I start asking about their relationship. And then I ask, when did you fall in love? When did you first fall in love? They say 40 years ago, when we were at the same class at high school, we started liking each other. Then I ask, so can you go back to the day before you started liking each other? So there are 20 other students, and there's this one person. Everyone is more or less the same because you did not have a special feeling for that particular person before that day you started feeling it. So before that day, if something happens to that person, the other one wouldn't care much. It's another person. But then after that day, you care a little bit. And then you fall in love, then you have so many experiences. Your bond gets stronger and stronger. Stronger your bond, when that other person is hurt, when that other person is dead, more sad, more upset you are going to be. It's like a band-aid. It's the normal cheap Dollarama band-aids. You can easily take it off. But there are some 3M band-aids which are very hard. So if you try to rip it off, it's going to hurt a lot. So it's like it's that affinity, it's that craving, or the affinity you have, the connection you have. Stronger the connection, more hurt you are going to get when that connection is lost. Right? It's like addiction. Like if you like something, you can get away with it. You can change, you can substitute. But if you're addicted, it's hard. If you're deprived of that addiction, you're going to get sick. You're going to get withdrawal symptoms. So the same way, the key, if you go to the most root of it, the origin of suffering is that craving a person would have. And the opposite of that, the cessation of suffering, is the absence of that craving. Now again, into English, this is translated as fading away of craving. But then there's another way of looking at it. Rather than looking at it as fading away, but if you don't have it, so it's very similar. The Pali word is very similar, but it's a very big difference. Fading away is one, not having to begin with is another one. So cessation can be due to no conditions at all. It's like the grass outside here. During winter, we can't say that there is grass outside. There's no grass because the conditions are not right. There's no grass. Maybe the seeds are there, but we're talking about grass here. There's no grass. There's no leaves because the conditions are not right. Not like they were fading away. They were not there. Conditions are not right, so the grass is not there. When the conditions are right, the grass is there. So that again also leads to the other big topic that we are going to discuss one of these days, called the interdependency. When the conditions are right, you see something. When the conditions are not there, you don't see it, right? So the cessation is because of the absence of craving. The origin or the samudaya is because there is craving. So that's samudaya and nirodha. And then the fourth part is the path or the magga, the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So the Noble Eightfold Path we are not going to discuss here because we have an entire big topic covering the Noble Eightfold Path, the one before the last. So we have the dependent arising, we have the 5 aggregates, and another topic called the 3 marks of existence. Right, so we are going to look at how this falls under this jigsaw puzzle. And so that is the summary of it. But then, I don't know, today you got exposed to a lot of words. I bombarded you with a lot of words, right? Katamanshavik also, Dukkha Mariya Satcham, Dukkha Mariya Satcham, Samudaya Ariya Satcham, Nirodha Ariya Satcham, Marga Ariya Satcham. Dukkha, Samudaya, Nirodha, Marga. If you look at our friend Rodrigo, he has a tattoo in his arm. He has tattooed it in Sanskrit language, the Four Noble Truths. I was thinking if he's here, it's very easy. I just have to point out to him the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha, Samudaya, Nirodha, Marga. So that's the Four Noble Truths. But then don't be overwhelmed by these jargon and the words. You know this, whatever I told, you already knew that. I didn't tell you anything new. I just gave some labels and I was trying to dissect it into, I was trying to magnify it. I was trying to go in deeper. That's what we were trying to do. So one day, because, this is overwhelming, there's a lot to learn. A Zen student came to a Zen monk and asked, Master, I want to learn Buddhism. I want to master the Four Noble Truths. How long do I need? The master said, well, you only need 7 years. Then the student said, well, if it's 7 years, what if I double my effort and, learn a lot of this jargon and read a lot of books? How long will I take? The master said, you will take 14 years then. Right? So the idea is not to do an intellectual exercise of trying to understand and remember a lot of words. This concept is very simple. Everything, again, I gave a little bit of words here. Four Noble Truths. What is dukkha? What is uh, what is dukkha? What is samudaya? What is nirodha? And what is nirodhagamini patipada? The Four Noble Truths. You have not still heard of probably the Eightfold Path. I will discuss that. It's again something that we can grasp, not something that we cannot understand. But the origin of suffering, in a very simple sense, craving is the origin of suffering, and the absence of that craving is the absence of or the cessation of suffering. But then there's another word which has been introduced, craving and ignorance. Craving is there because there's ignorance, right? Avidya, tanha, two words. So I will get into that word also. And on another day, I'm going to explain the difference between Kama Sukallika Yoga, the Kilimata Yoga, and what is Majjhima Patipada, right? Three words that I'm going to discuss later. And then I have also kept this entire thing about the 5 aggregates, Pancha Upadana Kanda, right? But don't worry, all these words will come to, all the puzzle pieces of the puzzle would be fitted at the end. We are going to learn the 5 aggregates. We are going to learn the dependent arising, a very important concept in Buddhism, and then the Eightfold Noble Path, and then we will then truly understand the Four Noble Truths in a, at least in a conceptual manner. But then again, the true learning of Buddhism is not on paper, not on this jargon. It's about your practice, right? And what we do on the cushion that is also not practice. That is practice into practice. What we do on the meditation cushion is not practicing of Buddhism. So we first understand it, then we go to the cushion and we try to see how it connects. But then we need to go to the real world and see how it really connects in my existential reality. Right? So that is the Four Noble Truths for today. And then next week we are going to look at June 8th, we are going to look at the 3 marks of existence. Now, I can't talk about 3 marks of existence without giving you a little bit of details of the Four Noble Truths. So that's why we are going to look at anicca, dukkha, and anatta. 3 marks of existence, and then the 5 aggregates if we can touch upon that. So that is the Four Noble Truths today. Do you have any questions, or are you completely baffled? Yeah, Joey has a question.
Yeah. Not so much a question, but maybe just a comment. So this time last year, I looked into dukkha.
Okay.
It was likely my friend Chad who I consulted.
Right.
So I had 2 more words
Okay.
that it proposed dukkha is. One is unsatisfactory,
Right.
and then the other is imperfect.
Right.
And then it goes on to say everything material and mental that begins and ends is composed of the 5 skandhas and has not been liberated to nirvana is dukkha. Thus,
Right.
even beautiful things and pleasant experiences are indeed dukkha.
Right.
That's a pretty heavy concept.
Right. So that is more like under the viparinama dukkha. So this flower, the beautiful flower, it's beautiful. I'm very happy. But then even this happiness is bound to be fading away. Right? So that's why dukkha strictly means all the negativity. Right? But how do you explain to someone who does not experience negativity in life? Right? So again, I could strongly relate to that when I became a monk. Usually people, it's very, almost very pop culture. When someone has a heartbreak or when someone's life is wrong, they become monks. You know? So I was trying to figure out why did I became a monk. I was never unhappy. I mean, I was not happy all the time. There were ups and downs, but whenever something happens, I know how to bounce back. So I became a monk when I was extremely happy when I decided. So I totally understand why Viparinama Dukkha is there because for people who are always going through agony, that's Dukkha Dukkha. But then there's another suffering which is not necessarily based on negativity, right? So then you can't call it suffering in that way. That's why the word is very limiting. That's why dukkha is a better word than suffering, right? If you have a word, please propose a word. We'll try to find a word. And then sankhara dukkha is the third one, which is the philosophical dukkha. It has nothing to do with what you feel, positive or negative, right? So it's a completely different layer.
So when you, my question is when you face dukkha,
Right.
like is it sometimes we suppress it? We suppress it purposefully so that we don't have to we don't get over them.
Right.
Is it the right way of doing it, or just observe and see what feelings it produces?
We'll wait for the Eightfold Noble Path about what to do. No, you're right, but let's take this approach. Often we want to take solutions, but let's try to get into the problem first. Right? Let's try to see deeper into why these things are arising, and what conditions, if you take it out, what would cease it to exist. Let's take that approach, right? It's a very valid question. Even the other day when Colin asked, what is the therapeutical usage of this? Like, what's the clinical usage of that, right?
Well, self-help, because
Right.
I'm not a therapist,
Right.
I'm a clinician.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one of the things that sort of flows with your question that we focus on a lot in when we're teaching mindfulness and self-compassion to individuals who are attending our self-help groups as peers, as equals, is we emphasize, and even dialectic behavioral therapy has actually, Marshall Enhan spent years in a Buddhist monastery and took a lot of what she learned there to create that behavioral therapy model.
DBT.
It goes around the idea that it is better to observe how we are feeling and to allow that experience to flow naturally than to try to fight against it. And the fight against it is where we cause ourselves to suffer.
Right.
So, which is part of it. I have my own question.
You have a question.
Exactly where this is coming from, and you probably will too. I have a slightly different set of terminology for what you just right, because I'm accustomed to samsara being the word we use for suffering, and then the cessation of suffering. Well, the cause of that suffering is attachment, because we are attached to people, places, things, such that when we are deprived of those things, that causes us to suffer. Right. Because from the moment we are born, we are attached to the fact that we exist. And then, of course, one of the ways to defeat attachment is wisdom realizing emptiness, the understanding that none of us actually exist. And none of this actually exists. So I understand exactly what you present. It's just I'm trying to make sure that the terms I'm applying.
Very good question. No, that's a wonderful question because if you ask the Buddhist world, 95% would associate the samsara dukkha to be the biggest problem. Right. So samsara dukkha means the reincarnation. Right. But then again, if you go to the core Buddhist suttas, you might find that that is not even addressed there, because reincarnation is not necessarily a Buddhist concept. It predates Buddhism. It was a Hindu concept. It's a Vedic concept, the cycle of samsara. But then, if you are to base your quest on a notion that you are going to be reborn in this eightfold path, the first point should be that you need to really figure it out that you are going to be reborn. You need to
what?
Right, as what, and if at all, if you are going to be reborn. That's a fundamental question, because if you are trying to solve the samsara dukkha, the first thing you need to do is to prove or validate that you're going to be reborn and the animals, beings are being reborn. So that's your first task. Without doing that, you can't go further, right? So in the Noble Eightfold Path, I don't see anywhere that you are asked to do that. So then what does that mean? Are we supposed to take it as a axiom that you are going to be reborn anyway? Right? And so today there's this other few kids who are going to come down and observe the 8 precepts, and they are going to, have a discussion right after this session. If I tell them that you are going to be reborn, they would ask, are you sure? Right? So this is why in classical Buddhism, it is not about the samsara dukkha. But in Hinduism, in Veda, moksha is all about samsara dukkha.
Tibetan tradition.
Correct. Tibetan Buddhism is very correct.
Because this piece is actually where a lot of the emphasis is put on understanding that we are all trapped in samsara, and the exit from samsara is lack of attachment.
Correct. Tibetan Buddhism is all about that. If you take the wheel of samsara, you have different exit points. Yeah. And it's about how you take this exit, which is called the moksha, which is actually more closer to. So this is where Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism sort of changes, goes different. Theravadians say we are the older form, we are the correct form because of that. It's like sometimes the Jews say we are the older testament, so we are the correct testament. And the Muslims say, well, we are the latest version, so we are the correct book. So it's a debate like that. But then thing is that even if you do not believe in rebirth and samsara, now it's okay, because we are not necessarily going to solve that issue. We have another existential issue. We try to be happy, but we can't contain that. We can't fulfill that. So what do we do about that? If we try to fix this, maybe our samsara will become better, but that's a later on question. It's not the main purpose here. How do we figure out our more existential realities, and what is the existential answers that we have for that? So very good observation, Colin. Thank you for asking that question, because it's a very valid question. Again, as a kid, this is exactly what I asked when the head monks and the elders, they said, well, you're going to be reborn. I asked, are you sure you're going to get reborn? And what if you are not? Then all this eightfold path you are doing is a waste. But if I have an existential problem, and if I'm following an eightfold path to solve that, then it makes sense to me.